two associates of one of Washington's most notorious drug lords won't be let out of prison early. That's the decision from a federal judge in the case of Melvin Butler and James Jones. They were associates of D.C. drug lord Rayful Edmund III in the 1980s. The judge refused to cut 2 years from each man's projected 28.5-year sentence. In issuing the decision, the judge said Edmunds' organization enabled drug addiction on an unprecedented and, quote, largely unimaginable scale.
There were fireworks right from the start of last night's second G.
Royce C. Lambert. He denied a request by the prosecutor for early release of two top associates of Rayful Edmund III, the notorious drug kingpin in Washington, D.C. I think they made a movie about him or film about him. One of the most notorious gang leaders around. The Washington Post described Judge Lambert's astonishment when the United States Attorney did not object to the drug felon's request for early release. Quote, the judge rebuked the office of acting United States Attorney Vincent Cohen, Jr. of the district, saying prosecutors did not give due weight to the criminal history of Butler, 52, the Los Angeles-based cocaine broker and partner of D.C. drug lord Rayful Edmund III, and Jones, 58, one of the four top armed enforcers of Edmund's violent trafficking network. The group imported as much as 1,700 pounds of Colombian cocaine a month. That's almost a ton a month. That's the largest amount I've ever seen. I thought the biggest case I'd ever seen was 600 pounds flown in on about 20 plane loads every several months. This is 1,700 pounds a month. Edmund's organization enabled drug addiction on a scale that until then, quote, was unprecedented and largely unimaginable in Washington, Lambert wrote. And that the harm the defendants caused is immeasurable and in many cases irreversible, close quote, the judge said. To put it bluntly, the court is surprised and disappointed by the United States Attorney's decision not to oppose the present motions, Lambert said. Quote, the court struggles to understand how the government could condone the release of Butler and Jones, each convicted of high-level, sophisticated, and violent drug trafficking offenses, close quote. So how's the federal judge doing their duty? I'm not sure where Ms. Zennis would be on this. Contrast that with many courts across the country that are currently rubber stamping motions for early release for federal drug trafficking felons under the Sentencing Commission's reductions to the sentencing guidelines that have already occurred and that are impacting the prison population significantly, as we will see. According to an October
1980s, Rayful Edmund was a household name, described by police as a drug kingpin, a terrorist who flooded D.C. streets with cocaine, and the mastermind of multiple murders. During the crack era of the 1980s, it was a trial so dangerous, U.S. Marshals guarded the courtroom with rifles, bulletproof glass separating potential jurors from defendants. Drug lord Rayful Edmund III landing life in prison on multiple drug distribution charges, then another 30 years for dealing drugs behind bars. Taking down his gang, which controlled 70% of D.C.'s drug trade, a major show of strength.
We're sending a message to the young people of this community that people like those individuals under indictment here are not the kind of role models that you should have, because these are the kind of people that will end up spending the rest of their life in prison.
30 years later, an about-face. In an 8-page motion, the U.S. Attorney's Office requests Edmond has his life sentence reduced. Defense Attorney Jason Downs calling the filing a step in the right direction for his client.
He feels that he has served, and we believe that Mr. Edmond has served and paid his debt to society.
From what I've been reading in the newspaper, seeing the news, Washington, D.C. is worse than it was when we was out on the street, so how could it be us? It must be somebody else. We must be the wrong people. it might be another family or something, but it wasn't us.
A Fox 5 jailhouse interview with Edmond shortly after his 1989 conviction, painting a very different picture than the man Down says the 54-year-old has become. Today, cooperating with investigators to land violent dealers behind bars, helping authorities understand the inner workings of DC's drug trade, even working to help crack a cold case homicide.
The government recognizes that everything that Mr. Edmond has done over the last 30 years has been in an attempt to rectify the damage that he has caused.
Today's filing is an early step. At this point, no more public court dates have been set. Ultimately, any reduced sentence will be up to Judge Emmett Sullivan to decide. Now, we reached out to Edmond's family for a reaction. They spoke with me on the phone tonight, but did not want to go on camera.
All right, here's a story that's new for us tonight. A notorious drug lord from D.C. could soon be a free man. Rayful Edmunds III, remember that name, was sentenced to life in prison, but a district court just filed a motion to reduce that sentence. Want to know why? John Henry will tell you.
To understand why this is such big news, you first have to know the major impact Rayful Edmunds had on D.C. 30 years ago.
In the late 1980s and early 90s, it was a lawless combat zone.
Back then, the district was murder capital of the country.
An automatic gunfire rang out.
And the crack cocaine epidemic helped fuel it.
People lining up 2 to 3 deep around the block to buy drugs.
At the center of it all, Rayful Edmunds.
Edmond ran the biggest crack and cocaine distribution ring in D.C. history.
I seen somebody at that time that was bigger than life.
At one point, he made up to $60,000 a day. That is, until he got caught.
Edmond is serving a mandatory life term.
And yet, behind bars, he still broke the law.
There have been abuses of privileges that these inmates were given.
The operation from prison rivaled the scope of the organization Edmond once ran from his Northeast neighborhood.
Now, Edmond got an additional 30 years for his crimes in prison. So why do the feds now think he should be released early? Well, apparently, he talked a lot. For 20 years, the D.C. United States Attorney said his cooperation had been both deep and wide. He discussed cold case murders, participated in reverse undercover drug sting operations. It ultimately all led the attorney's office to ask a judge to consider reducing the 54-year-old's life sentence for his D.C. crimes to an unspecified term. Now it's up to a judge to see if that should happen.